Welcome to TLD Talks, where we share insights about key legal and business matters that are impacting SMEs today. Bringing together experts from a range of backgrounds, we'll be tackling the issues that matter to you. I'm Ed Simpson, CEO of the Legal Director, and I'm joined on today's podcast by one of our very experienced client legal directors, Amanda Hamilton-Stanley, and we're going to be having a chat about the importance of business relationships. So hello Amanda, and thanks for joining me today.
Hi Ed.
For the benefit of our listeners, Amanda, could I ask you please to briefly introduce yourself and your practice at TLD?
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you for having me on here today, Ed. I've been working for the Legal Director for almost 2 years now, having spent over 20 years in-house before that. As you'd expect, I pick up all sorts of legal issues for the clients I work with, from commercial contracts, reviewing legal services provision, looking at governance and risk and how to manage the right balance of controls without overly constraining entrepreneurial spirit, company secretariat work, supporting resolution of disputes with third parties and many other things. And I find that clients appreciate the balance of legal knowledge with the business acumen that I've accumulated over a long career in industry, which means that I bring a pragmatic and proportionate approach to the issues they ask me for help with.
Thanks, Amanda. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be having a chat about business relationships, and starting with the most obvious question. What are we actually talking about here? What do we actually mean when we talk about business relationships, and why are they important?
Every business is built on relationships, whether that's your customers, your B2B partners, or legal relationships like joint ventures, your employees, or your financial relationships with your external funders. And when business relationships are running well, both parties get something out of them, and there's a combined ambition to grow and build on that together in a way that benefits both of you. And like any relationship in any walk of life, it's important for businesses to be clear about what they want and need from those relationships, to manage them well and to deal with any bumps in the road that crop up from time to time.
So tell me about some of those bumps in the road. What sort of things could happen to disturb or disrupt one of these business relationships?
Well, the reason it's so important will vary depending on the nature of your business. But just think about what might happen if things change at a business partner. For example, your main contact leaves that business and their replacement has strong links with a competitor of yours. Or if you rely on specific commodities or products that are in short supply, or the other business is taken over by someone else with a different approach to you. Those changes might not mean that the business between you will change, but they might. So it's important to think about how to protect your business and to give yourself the time to make appropriate changes if they're needed.
So I'm guessing then every business is going to have lots of these relationships, as you said, with suppliers, with employees, with funders, insurers, etc. How do you identify what the really critical ones are?
Well, I think your critical business relationships are the ones which, if something goes wrong, might put your own business at risk. So that could be someone who supplies a critical component to your business, or one where you rely on a significant level of purchasing from them, which if you can no longer do that, is going to take some time to fulfill with orders from somewhere else. And there may also be partners where if things go wrong, it can cause you reputational issues, such as slavery issues in supply chains or environmental damage. So you want to make sure you're working with partners who share your values and your approach to doing things right.
Okay, so then how would you go about helping a client to identify the risks that they're facing in their business relationships, and which ones of those are the critical ones?
Well, first of all, I'd say think about your business culture. What kind of business are you? What kind of reputation do you want in your market? What kind of people do you want to work with, really? It can make a big difference as to how you manage things when you work with people you can build up trust with. You need to think about what's important to you and your business. What are your red lines around either financial information, financial elements, or behaviours from that business partner? Think about what fits with your own products and services. And are there any ethical issues that are particularly important to you in a business partner, like attitudes to sustainability or the way they treat their employees or their customers? Secondly, I'd say you need to take the time to understand what your goals and motivators are, as well as your risk appetite. That's really important. Attitude to risk and partnering is one of the things I ask about early on in a business relationship, because it drives the approach to legal issues as well as really everything else in that business. And it's very easy when you start a business to get focused on just doing the core business and juggling all the different hats you're wearing. So your governance framework and contracts need to work for you the way you want them to, and focusing on the areas of business that are critical for you and minimising the impact of a business relationship not working out for you.
So we're saying that all businesses are built on relationships, and then each of those relationships is going to be underpinned by some sort of contract. And our advice at the Legal Director would always be that businesses should take the time to properly document those contracts. So to ensure that their important trading relationships don't just rely on goodwill and personal connections, personal relationships. So how do you go about making sure that these contracts that underpin important business relationships, that they reflect the relative importance of the relationship that they're securing and protect the business in an appropriate way?
So as a starting point, we'd look at your critical business relationships, who they're with and how you're protecting them. That can mean talking with your commercial teams and probably categorising your business relationships by the degree of significance to your business. Looking at the contracts you've got in place already, are there any loopholes or potential issues there if there's a change of control at the other business? Or how to ensure that you've got appropriate termination provisions that give you time to replace any lost business. And we can also look at how your relationships with your employees work, how you retain key staff, for example, and how to protect commercially sensitive information if those staff choose to move on, especially if they're going off to a competitor.
I see. So I'm a business owner listening to this podcast, and I get it. I understand that I should be documenting all of my business relationships in some sort of contract, but frankly, I don't really want to be spending loads of my time on this stuff. So 2 questions. Can't I just get you to generate a single contract that I can use for everything? Number 1. And number 2, actually, I know that my competitors have done this already. Why don't I just go onto the internet and find their terms and conditions and copy theirs?
Well, that's definitely one approach, but every business is different. And even amongst competitors, their motivations and risk appetites wouldn't be the same. So what's appropriate for your business, Ed, might not work for another business doing something similar. So those differences need to be reflected in your contracts. One size fits all approach is virtually never going to be appropriate. Standard documents for a business should reflect the commercial realities of the business and the appetite for risk in that business. And most importantly, they need to be usable by the people within your business. And too often you see standard contracts or templates drafted that are totally disproportionate to what's really needed. And that can set a business relationship off on the wrong foot because it causes frustration and delay while both parties spend time negotiating instead of actually getting on with the business relationship.
Okay, so what I'm hearing then is that it is worth spending time, and this is very much our approach, your approach, spending time to understand what a particular relationship, what the motivations, what the goal are, the risk appetite, and then making sure that those things are appropriately reflected in the contract. So Amanda, wearing my business owner's hat again, I get that there's a real value and importance in getting my business relationships contracted and making sure that those contracts are properly put together and reflect risk appetite, etc. But it sounds like I could be spending an awful lot of my time just doing contracts, which, to be honest with you, I don't really want to do.
No, I completely understand that. And, templates are fine and a great starting point, and you do need contracts, but you can find ways to ensure that you as the business owner aren't spending all your time on it, and nor are your teams, because you want them to be actually doing more than just contracts, clearly. So one way you can do it is to look at delegating authority to your team, commensurate with the importance of each contract they're signing. Your standard documents should reflect the commercial realities and your appetite for risk, so you know that they're appropriate for your business. And most importantly, they need to be usable by your business teams. So one thing that we tend to look at is which of your standard terms gets regular pushback from your business partners. And then you can look at what changes you might sensibly make to reduce the negotiation time, provided you're not changing your risk profile in a way that doesn't work for you. I'm a firm believer that contracts don't belong to the legal team, but to the business person who's negotiated that contract. This means it's important that contracts are accessible to everyone who has to use them, and that the business people know what's safe to negotiate and what they might want to take advice on to protect the business. And as businesses get bigger, we sometimes see the challenges for CEOs and CFOs of still having to sign off on all business contracts, and that can become a bottleneck if it's not managed well. There's a real balance between having visibility of what's going on in your business and having the flexibility to move things at the right speed.
Amanda, you mentioned some tools there. Can you tell me about some of the tools that you've implemented at the businesses that you've worked with that have helped senior leadership teams, CEOs, CFOs to deal with this, and how they sort of take themselves out of being that bottleneck?
Yeah, so that can be done in a number of ways to suit the business you've got. Whether it's a simple deal sign-off process that funnels the simpler and less significant contracts away from the business critical, high value or high risk contracts, where you take a different approach to who has to sign it off. Or you can use deal signing memos, which set out the main terms and any deviations from your standards. So the person signing only has to look at one page rather than read the whole contract. Organising signing meetings with the key people who've been involved can also help for very significant contracts. Because ultimately it's about the CEO, CFO and the business leaders knowing that their trusted team members have been involved in the negotiations and that they know what the deal's about and they've managed the risks appropriately so that they can give that assurance up the chain. One of the campaigns I ran in my last corporate role was something called Helping Us to Help You, which involved a combination of suitable templates for the teams to use themselves, with limited scope for them to make amendments to it without getting the legal team involved, plus some training on what the contracts for different types of partnerships should cover, alongside some relatively simple contract negotiation tips like sending out your standard terms when requesting quotes for work, so the other party knows what your standard terms are before you start the relationship. And things like creating a simple contract instruction form that sets out in one place all the legal team needs to know to create bespoke legal agreements. It sounds really simple, but reducing the number of times we have to go back and forth to get basic information really speeds things up. And I'm also currently doing some work on the concept of legal design, which is about making contracts accessible to everybody who's using them. A great example here is influencers for brands and products. And actually, fundamentally, what you need to do is make sure everybody knows what they should and should not be doing. Often sending a 15-page legal document to somebody who's an influencer for a brand will be of relatively limited value. Whereas if you can send a document in table format or that's designed in a way that is easy to read and understand, that makes sure that everybody knows who's doing what and what they should and shouldn't do, that makes it a much more useful document for the business to use.
That's a really interesting idea of taking that concept you mentioned earlier out, making sure things are appropriate and thinking about the audience who's going to be receiving the document that you're sending out. You mentioned that it's often the simple things that can have the biggest impact. One client that I worked with in the past, where actually the bottleneck was the legal team, because the internal policy was everything has to go through legal. Legal got swamped. And the way they got around that was they realised there were, maybe half a dozen clauses that were always getting challenged in their standard terms and conditions. So they wrote a little playbook which explained why the clause needed to be the way it was. A fallback clause was drafted as well that could be deployed. And this was all then pushed out to the business people who were on the front line doing the negotiations. And it was only if you'd gone through those various steps that you then needed to come back to legal and get their help. And the number of inquiries going to legal dropped by 90%. It was amazing. So small things that sound obvious actually can have a really big positive impact on the efficiency, but make sure that you are protecting those relationships in the right way.
And that's exactly the point, Ed. It's not saying legal isn't there to support the business in doing what they need to do. It's about making sure that the times you need to take things to your legal team are those where you really need their advice and input and there's added value. not the day-to-day churn of contracts. So it's really important for businesses to find the ways to balance that need to protect themselves with not having that bottleneck in the legal team. And you see it quite frequently. And as you say, there are quite a lot of fairly simple tricks and tips that you can apply that will really help businesses to manage that.
Brilliant. And those sorts of things, they're applicable to businesses large and small, so they're relevant to any business. Amanda, that's been fantastic. Really interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Good to talk to you.
That brings us to the end of the podcast today. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed our discussion today, you can subscribe to our monthly TLD talks, covering a wide range of legal and management topics. You can also find TLD talks on Apple, Spotify and Google. The details are also on our website, www.thelegaldirector.co.uk. If you'd like help with your business relationships and how you can document them in the most appropriate way for your business, or if you're interested in the wider work of the legal director and how a part-time legal director can save you time and money, then do please give us a call on 020 3053 8613 or visit our website.